Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's top 50 episodes of Voyager. In this video, I will count down my top 50 favorite episodes of Star Trek Voyager. Now, this video is part of a series of videos where I conclude my coverage of Star Trek Voyager. As over the past 7 months, I have reviewed every single episode of Star Trek Voyager, one season at a time. So I'm just doing a series of little wrap-up videos to wrap up my coverage of Voyager. So since Voyager is fresh in my mind, I came up with a list of my favorite episodes. So I was sort of rating them, keeping notes on them as I was watching the series. And so, this video I'm just gonna babble on for as long as need be. So if this isn't for you, you don't want a really long video, I do have another video that's like 15-20 minutes long where I get into my top 10 favorite episodes of Voyager. So you can check that out if this isn't your thing. But bear in mind that this video won't necessarily match up with that video, because I have sort of judged these episodes after my recent rewatch, whereas before, when I made that video, it's been years since I'd seen those episodes because I wasn't going to rewatch the entire show, which is 7 seasons with 25 episodes per season, just to do one 15-20 minute video. But I have for my series, so I thought I'd square up my top 50 favorite episodes of Voyager. Now, I don't know, some of especially when you get into some of the specific rankings, it will change my mood. Like, a couple years from now, if I watch the show again, I might change my mind and say, oh, I want some things there and other things there. But this is my rankings as of now. As I do ultimately, as I say, I do ultimately really like Voyager. I think it's one of the best science fiction shows ever made. So I wanted to highlight where the episodes that are really good, where the show got it really right. Now, again, another disclaimer, this is of course my opinion. A lot of other people will disagree. I know I've seen other lists where they have episodes on their worst list, which I think should be in the best list. And other lists I've seen that had episodes on their best list that I thought should be in the worst list. So it's no doubt that a lot of you are going to feel the same way about my list. You'll be like, well, that episode doesn't belong here. It belongs on the worst list. Not one you had in your worst list belongs in your best list. That, it's fine. Everyone has different opinions on Voyager and whatnot. So this is just my opinion on which episodes are great. So anyway, let's, and as I did with my worst list, I'm going to have the title card pop up because I do ratings for each episode between 1 through 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best, and I will have a little title card that pops up that says which ratings this particular section of my top 50 falls into. So anyway, let us now get started into my top 50 favorite episodes of Voyager. So coming in at number 50 is the very first episode of the entire show, Caretaker. I'm not sure, I said this was my favorite premiere episode of all Star Trek, although, with Emissary and Deep Space Nine, it's kind of neck and neck, but although I do think this squeaks it out for me because I had more issues with Emissary than I had with this episode. This episode, I thought, was a really great introduction to all the characters and how they sort of weed them in. You start with a few main characters and they start to trickle in. And it doesn't in a way that made sense. The way Encounter at Farpoint didn't really make sense in the way that Emissary again did. It was kind of but the way they do it here, I think, is it flows with the story a lot better. It's really interesting. For the first section of the episodes, actually we're following Tom Paris's perspective, which was an interesting choice because he's this prisoner. He gets recruited by Janeway to get, to guide them on this mission to find this Maquis ship. And so you see him meet Harry Kim and make friends with him, and you see all the people on the ship snickering behind his back. So you follow his perspective, which is pretty interesting, until we get into the Delta Quadrant, and then we switch to sort of more Janeway's perspective, and then we get other perspectives as well, as like Harry Kim and B'Elanna, who are trapped on Ocampa, and then you get Neelix and Kes when you meet them as well. Now, the fatal flaw in this episode, to me, it's not the fact that they didn't put the time delay explosion on the caretaker array and then use it to go back home and have it blow up, because a lot of people point to that as a huge, gigantic plot hole in the entire show. But I'm not. I mean, yeah, sure, they could have done that, but I'm not that big on that, because how did they know that the Kazon wouldn't just disarm it after they left? Think of that. But anyway, like, I mean, even if that was unlikely, they wanted to be sure. I mean, you could say, well, they could set it to go off like 5 seconds after they left. Well, then that would be cutting it close and they might destroy themselves. But anyway, regardless, it never really bothered me that much. What did bother me was the fact that the Maquis, by the end of this freaking episode, are in Starfleet uniforms, and Chakotay is instantly the first officer. Like, it happened like that in the last scene, because throughout the episode, they're very different. Like, these other terrorists, and they're dressed the same, and they're having their adversary, and then all of a sudden, like, one scene at the very end of the episode, they're in Starfleet uniforms. This is something Ronald D. Moore also pointed out was a fatal flaw in Voyager, and I think, but to me, this is more an issue with the structure of the first season, or structure of the show overall, than it is with this episode in particular, because otherwise this episode is really great, and it's more of a blemish on the show overall, that because it really undermines the whole purpose of having, like, why even have another Maquis crew or another terrorist group if they're going to be integrated into the Starfleet crew instantly anyway. It renders the whole concept kind of pointless. But anyway, other than that, this was a really fun episode. I think it was it was a really intense, like, setup for the show. I think more so than any other Trek series, that it instantly puts you into this, like, adventure story where they're flown to the other side of the galaxy. They're forced to work together with these people they don't want to work with, and we meet the characters through this great story, which is what I like. So it's my number 50. Anyway, move on to my number 49, which is another early first season Voyager episode, and that's Time and Again. And when I talked about this episode and my season by season review, I even mentioned that this episode is often underrated, and I agree. I think this is an underrated episode. Granted, with the way Janeway behaves in this episode is very different than the way she behaves in later seasons, but it's one of the early episodes. It's like episode number 3 or number 4, I believe. So it's very early. So I can sort of forgive it for that, because here she's really, like, stingent about we can't violate the prime directive under any circumstances, and she's not quite like that in later seasons. That's not quite the way she behaves. So, but I think is a really interesting concept. It was really dark at the start and at the beginning, where they find this destroyed world. And they're exploring it, and they go back in time, like 5 days or whatever, and to see, all this vibrant society that was alive that was just recently destroyed. And you find out by the end of it, it was their fault because their time traveling is what fucked it up in the first place. Now, the time travel logic in this episode is a bit, which is maybe why it doesn't rank a bit higher on my countdown. But still, I think overall, like, there's a lot of great drama. I mean, there's that annoying kid, too, and they all looked really cheesy in the 90s. It's really cheesy 90s costumes and stuff. But other than that, like, I think we had some great character moments between Janeway and Paris, and I did like the dark theme of, like, this world that was destroyed and they're using time travel to visit. It was great. So that's my number 49, and then we come to number 48, which is Child's Play, which is a 6-season episode where Ichib meets his parents. Meet the parents. Now, this is interesting because this was actually the first episode they had with the Borg children after they integrated onto crew. So this is the first time that I realized they were going to be recurring characters, and that they weren't just going to totally forget they existed like they did with the Equinox crew. Anyway. And it's interesting that the first episode we do get that establishes them as recurring characters is Icheb leaving the ship, which I don't think maybe wasn't the best play, because they're all sad that he's leaving, but from audience perspective, he just got there. So I think maybe they should have saved this episode a bit later. It's also a bit ironic. This episode's about, Icheb having to leave the other Borg kids who have to stay on Voyager and don't want to see him go, when in actuality it ends up being the opposite, where the other Borg children leave and Icheb's the one stuck on Voyager. But of course this episode explains why he has to remain on Voyager permanently, because his parents just want to use him as a weapon of mass destruction. I think that was a really nice twist. I like that. I like that the episode sort of dealt with Seven's growth, because she thought of Icheb as a son figure. And again, this would have came off a bit more effectively had they saved this episode for later. But anyway, and how she had to sort of let go and have turnover like her surrogate son to his real parents, and had that inner conflict. But then you find out that the parents are up to no good. And I don't know, some people might not like that twist, because they might think it might have been more powerful had she had to let him go. But I thought that was interesting, because then it turns things on its head. So people like Janeway and stuff are like, when Seven did realize that something was up, they'd be like, "Oh, you're just being, clingy to this, son figure. Let him go." But really, she was right. And I think that was a really nice twist with the parents' motivation, and to see the interactions between them. These were actually played by pretty decent guest actors. We usually don't get good guest actors on Voyager. The one who played his father was this guy who played the sleazy lawyer with the dead cat from Battlestar Galactica. He also made an appearance on Firefly. I don't know, they hadn't put on an American accent, so I didn't even recognize him until I had to look him up on IMDb, because I didn't recognize him without his British accent. But apparently he's also become quite popular in the show Supernatural, which I don't watch, so I don't really know. But he was great. He's always a good actor, so he was great in this episode. And the woman who played his wife was passable. I mean, she was fine. But it was great getting the scenes between them, because he didn't he was like, well, let's accept him as a son. Let's not just send him to his death. But then she points out that they're going to get destroyed by the Borg. This is their only recourse against assimilation from the Borg, because they're right by a Borg warp hub, so as soon as they have any semblance of technology, the Borg come and assimilate them. So it's interesting having them under that certain threat, so they use the only weapon they have at their disposal is genetics, so they genetically engineer this boy to spread this disease, and it also retroactively explains why the Borg cube was when Voyager found the Borg cube that was completely wiped out, and they found the children, that this explains why that happened. Now, I think that's brilliant, and I think you can't really tell if the writers had this idea in mind when they wrote the other episode, Collective. Knowing the Voyager writers, I would say no. I would say that they came up with it for this episode, but bravo to them, because that actually matches up pretty perfectly. Well, anyway, that's my number 48. Let's move on. And coming in at number 47 for me is Distant Origin. This was a very popular episode. Some people might disagree that I have it this low. Some people would have it in their top 10s. I don't know. I wasn't that big on this episode. The plot seemed pretty simplistic. People talk about the Voth and how fascinating of a race they are, and maybe this episode would have ranked higher if we ever saw the Voth again. And to be perfectly honest, the fact that we didn't see the Voth again does sort of hold this episode back because why do I care about the species that we never see again? But it was interesting the way this episode was done, and I love this is one of the rare cases of continuity in Voyager where the episode, in fact, apparently the producers fought the writers on this, but the writers actually won, so hooray for them, that the episode begins with a lot of callbacks to previous episodes this season where the Voth are tracking down Voyager, so they go across the planet they were at in Base 6 where they got trapped at, and then they go to the space station where Neelix and his buddy were trying to sell drugs and stuff like that. So that was interesting to have that little callback, and you see the whole first part of the episode was from their perspective. Now, I don't know, that kind of, at first I found that very distancing for me, like this sort of distanced me from the episode. But once it all comes together and we see them sort of, parading like the way we see Starfleet officers do on primitive cultures, where they show up in a primitive culture in a cloak and be like, well, we can't interfere because Prime Directive. But now the tables are turned because these aliens do the same thing to them. And they treat it more, it's more like it's like watching one of those nature shows where you have the people like, oh, these are the people in their own habitat. And I don't know, I think maybe they played that to too much of an extreme. That was a bit cheesy, like when Tom and B'Elanna were bantering, oh, that's their mating ritual. I'm like, alright, now you're pushing that a bit too far. But the episode got a little bit more interesting towards the end, where they did the whole thing with the trial, and of course, like they found out that they're actually related, and because they're from Earth, apparently they're like distant cousins of dinosaurs or something, a specific dinosaur, which I can't remember. But anyway, so, and this goes again to doctrine, there's this trial, whatever, and I don't know, like I almost mentioned this in my season by season review, but I wasn't entirely sure about this because it's been a while since I've seen the Planet of the Apes. But I saw this brief synopsis of the original Planet of the Apes, 1968 or 60, whatever what it was, with Charlton Heston. And it seems like this is the plot of that movie. Maybe I'm remembering wrong, but from that synopsis, it does seem like in the Planet of the Apes, they were a couple of apes who were trying to say, oh, we're related, and this was a human, and we come from humans, and they were treated like very poorly, and because it went against, they didn't say doctrine, but whatever it was, and so those other apes were excised, and Charlton Heston's character was the one who was like, made friends with them, and that's kind of what happened here with Chakotay, made friends with these other ones who were saying, no, we're related, but they're excised for going against doctrine. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Someone who's seen Planet of the Apes more recently might correct me on that, but regardless, like, yeah, I mean, I thought this episode was interesting, the weird way they did it with the different perspectives and stuff like that, but I just don't think it was top 10 material for me anyway. Anyway, we'll move on to my number 46, which is Displaced. I think this episode actually came right after just an origin in chronological order in season 3. Now, I think most people aren't that big on this episode, but for me, like, it's very simplistic. There's not much to it. It's more of it's a suspense episode, and I think it actually does suspense well, and it's unique because the way it uses a story device that we haven't really seen before or after, where these aliens just appear one at a time, and a crew member from Voyager disappear one at a time. And it's kind of interesting because at first, like, the crew's first instinct is to assume that this is a hostile alien takeover, but then the aliens sort of work with them and sort of try to convince them that, oh, we're innocent, we don't know what's going on. But it turns out it actually is an alien hostile takeover. And it was kind of frustrating to see the crew actually fall for it, because it's like, come on, guys, smarten up on this. But it was a really suspense, really intense, and I love how they actually succeeded in taking over Voyager. And halfway through the episode, like, Voyager crew is entirely trapped in this prison planet, but then to see them have this like prison break, and they broke out and go into the different habitats and fucked with these different people who were apparently like they couldn't stand the cold and the light. So yeah, it was a really intense ending to see the crew have to break out of prison and get the better of these aliens. So overall, I'd say, yeah, it's a pretty decent episode. So we'll move on to my number 45, which is Critical Care, which, yeah, this is, I mostly like because of the powerful message with the U.S. healthcare system. It's very obvious they're making an analogy for it with this, asshole hospital administrator guy, like, not giving a shit about, people who has a low value to society, as he rates it, and so they let them die, while the people who are like, well, these are more valuable to society, so we'll give them the better treatment. And it has that it's like a dystopian sort of despair, and I think it was very poignant. And also, more than that, I do like the character journey the Doctor goes on in this episode, as he tries to fight against this system, because he's coming from, and I love that he's the one who represents Starfleet ideals, because he's the hologram, of course, but it's interesting that they choose him to do it, and he's willing to put his own life or program on the line to stick up for his principles, and he even goes as far as torturing someone to do the right thing in order to force them to do the right thing, that was really dark. And I love how Doctor even questions himself by the end of the episode. It's like, please tell me something's wrong with my program. How could I do this? But really, he was in the right to do so. And by doing what he did affect change for the better. So that was an interesting episode. But it doesn't run Kaya because there's this side plot with the stupid alien that stole the Doctor, which was kind of boring. And some things about the hospital I found a bit annoying as well. But I love this character journey and the social commentary. Anyway, we'll move on to my number 44, which is Prototype. Season 2 episode. Now, yeah, this is another episode kind of like Displaced, where there's not much to it, but I always found it a very interesting. I think this is actually a very good character episode for B'Elanna Torres. I love B'Elanna Torres a lot more in the earlier seasons before she just became Tom's wife, and they kind of ruined her character. And and in this season, we get her wanting to help, and also explores more her engineering side and how she's interested in engineering puzzles, and how that really excites her, which is cool because I think they don't explore the chief engineer side of her enough, and so this episode we really get that. And also how, because she's so fascinated by these robots, that she actually ends up becoming friends with them and becoming really close to them and caring about what happens. So we see that even though Janeway takes more of the cautious, I don't know about this, side, which, of course, we find out is totally justified when we realize that they're part of this ongoing robotic war that killed all the humans that created them. And, of course, once B'Elanna realizes this, then she, fights against them and destroys the prototype that she helped create. But I thought there was actually really great drama at the end of the episode where she has to apologize. You could tell she feels really bad because she made friends with this robot, and she has to, and she just betrayed them, and she feels horrible about doing it, but she realized it was the right thing to do, because otherwise it would perpetuate this robot war, which could, kill many others as well. And so that was really powerful. I did like the episode for that, so that was pretty decent. Next episode on number 43 will be Lineage. This is the episode I talked about that I actually probably might have considered this on my worst list before this recent rewatch. I changed my mind on the rewatch because my instinct is to say this episode sucks because it's about B'Elanna getting pregnant with Tom's child, and I'm very anti-Tom and B'Elanna, as you know, as I was just talking about. But when I get over that, I realize that there's the flashbacks with B'Elanna as a child and dealing with her father, and it brings up the issues of why she's very much against her. I think this is one of the best episodes that handles why she's against her Klingon side and tries to fight her Klingon nature. There's just a lot of episodes that try to do this, which I think came off like Faces and Prophecy. I don't think they handled it very well. Or Barge of the Dead. But this episode, I think, actually handled, like, those flashbacks with her father when she was camping with, her cousins. That was so powerful. That was so well done. Now, the episode does get a bit over the top by the end, and it seems like they do this just to create a conflict where she reprograms the doctor to force him to do the procedure. That was over the top, and I don't really buy that she gets off scot-free for doing that as well. But other than that, it's a really great character episode, so I liked it for that. We move on to number 42, Someone to Watch Over Me, season 5 episode, which really, it's a fun episode where Seven's learning to date and the doctor's teaching her how to date. Not only is it like a fun episode, it's also great character interactions between the Doctor and 709, because their relationship had been building ever since season 4, where he was sort of mentoring her. And the fact that he would actually, have feelings for her, especially after this experience of trying to find a date for her, trying to help her explore romantic aspects, was so well done. It was so natural. It made so much sense. And this is the episode why so many people were pissed off with the show for not putting those two together and instead putting them with other people that they didn't have any chemistry with whatsoever. And I totally buy that, and apparently that's all Rick Berman's fault, because they wanted, and that's the thing that frustrates me most about this episode, is the final scene when the Doctor goes to Seven and says, I love you, but then you find out that's not really Seven, it's a hologram, that ruins the episode to me, because, and originally it was supposed to be actually Seven, and they were going to have them have this dynamic, but God forbid you have any fucking character development in the show, so Rick Berman's put in and said, no, fuck him. But I still love this episode for the rest of it, and I'll have to overlook Berman's interference, because it was really, the writers knew what they were doing. They had the natural character development from these two characters, and it's kind of a shame that it couldn't develop further, but, still a good episode. So, next episode on my list is number 41, Worst Case Scenario. I always bitch about season 3, but it's like the last, so I've now done the last 3 episodes. The last episode of season 3 I'll get to much later. But, like the last 4 episodes of season 3 were actually really good, and I did talk about how the writers did manage to turn themselves around by the end of season 3, but before these 4 episodes, season 3 was pretty much shit, which, you can watch my worst stuff to hear me talk more about that. But, Worst Case Scenario this is another fun episode. It doesn't rank higher because the plot is kind of contrived. Like, I don't really buy that Seska would set up this death trap for Tuvok. This is before she was exposed as a Cardassian, so why would she try to kill Tuvok? Wouldn't that blow her cover? And in fact, because the holographic version outright says, I'm Seska and I'm trying to kill you. And the people outside the holodeck can hear this. Now, in third season time, it's like, oh, well, Seska is dead and she was a Cardassian and we know she's a villain anyway. But at the time she wrote this would be giving away, like, imagine this happened in season 1 where Tuvok's in the holodeck and, like, Seska's trying to kill me. So they would immediately go and arrest Seska and be like, what the fuck? Why are you trying to kill Tuvok? So that was kind of contrived, but if you overlook that, I love the first half of this episode in particular, where this is I think the best use of them having a holodeck program I'm just shuddering thinking of that stupid Irish pub shit they did in season 6, but they actually did it right here, where they have a holo novel and this is great. I think it almost didn't even need to have that suspense plot, but I think that was forced on, like, the higher ups. So we had to have tension in this episode. It probably would have been better had they not even did that and they just stuck it to the crew hanging out, having fun on the holodeck. And I even like this better than Captain Proton, which you won't actually find on my list, because like, it deals with the Voyager crew themselves. It's not, and this is something Star Trek has rarely done. Usually when they're in a holodeck, they go to the 20th century or 20th century fiction or 18th century or something like that. And this is something unique. Actually, we go to a time on the ship earlier in the season, and where the Maquis, tensions, and again, this, what I just talked about with the premiere episode, has the Maquis integrated too quickly into the Starfleet, and this episode actually is a good counter to that. It shows you some of the tension that existed at the time in this what-if scenario. What if Chakotay took over the ship? And that was fascinating. It was fascinating seeing the different characters play, different roles on. It's like choose your own adventure. Sometimes, like, Neelix would do this, like Neelix would go along with them. Tom Paris would, try to thwart them. And it was interesting seeing that. So I actually think it might have been better if they continued playing it that way. But the stuff with Suska taking over, trying to kill Tuvok and Paris, that was intense as well, even if it was a bit contrived. So that was still good storytelling. So yeah, overall good episode. Alright, so we move on to my number 40, which is Gravity. Gravity! So, yeah, this is another episode I talked about that on my recent rewatch. I changed my mind about, because originally this is, I just think of this is an episode where Tuvok and Tom get stuck in his shuttle crashes, and they get stuck in a planet, and we've seen this a million times before, but when I look, and they have like a time differential thing, which I think just kind of came out of nowhere, and they didn't really, I don't know, it just seemed thrown in there. It didn't really gel with the episode. But when I look at it, there's the character story with Tuvok, and at first I thought it was kind of pretentious, but when I go back and watch it, I think it actually, this is the best character journey into Tuvok. And it shows him as a kid, fighting his emotion. It's great, and I love stuff that do contrast, that do juxtaposition, where we get the juxtaposition as him as a child letting his love and emotions control him. And in present times, this other woman has a crush on him, but he can't reciprocate because he's married and he doesn't feel the same way about her, and so he's sort of on the opposite side of what he was when he was a kid. And I love that juxtaposition, and by the end of the episode where he mind melds with her, and so she's able to feel exactly why, totally understand why he rejected her. I'm almost crying thinking about it. It was just so powerful. It was such a powerful ending. It's not higher on my list because it does have the crash cliche, and the episode does seem, the main plot will get a bit boring at times, but that character story was really good. Anyway, coming in at number 39 is Mortal Coil. So this is an episode, again, this is another one where I thought better of it on my rewatch. But to be honest, I'd only seen this episode, this is one of the episodes I hadn't seen very much at all. I didn't even know it existed until years after. I just must have missed it while it was airing. So I'd only seen it 2 or 3 times, where most of these other episodes I've seen 10 plus. So I'm not as familiar with this episode. So at first it did come off, and again, it does go over the top at the end when Neelix tries to kill himself because they need to have some tension in the episode. But I think this is a great use of Chakotay. I love how Neelix reaches out to Chakotay, and we get interactions between the two of them, and Chakotay is the one who guides him through his crisis of faith. And it makes total sense because Chakotay is portrayed as the most spiritual character, and this is again before Chakotay became a bland, they ruined his character in later seasons, he just became a bland cardboard cutout. We get to see him when he was actually being used correctly, and the crisis of faith that Neelix goes through is totally believable as well, because he died. He actually died, and Seven used their nanoprobes to bring him back to life. I'm a bit iffy on that, because, we can cure death whenever they do this. People bitched about Into Darkness for doing this, but it was done first here, friends. We can cure death. That's a bit then how can anyone die? So that's a bit, I don't know. But other than that, the the reaction he goes through, he's thinking, I should actually be dead, and this crisis of faith that this creates in him was fascinating. I love the way, really great character interactions. The scene where he has that nightmare, or the vision quest, like with Chakotay takes him on the vision quest, it turns into a nightmare because he gets a vision of his sister, which is mentioned in the episode Jetrel. So I love the callback. Great. Whenever Voyager does continuity, because it rarely does it right. So he has a vision of his sister who died during the war, and he and she's really creepy. She's acting really creepy, and then you hear the voice of Naomi Wildman superimposed over her and goes, "Scared you," and she just disintegrates in front of him. Like, that could give me nightmares. That was legit one of the most terrifying, like, creepy, like, scenes that Star Trek franchise has ever done. It was really well done. But anyway, let me move on to my number 38, which is Nothing Human. This is another pretty powerful episode where B'Elanna gets her life gets put in danger because this weird, like, alien thingy. It's like this thingy. If you've seen the episode, you know what I'm talking about. It attaches itself to B'Elanna. First of all, I love that they had that weird alien thingy, and that the universal translator couldn't quite crack their language, and it just came off as because they were just so alien. In fact, really, Voyager should have encountered more aliens like this in the Delta Quadrant, not just carbon copies of the Klingons, or freaking, humans from 1950s that smoke cigarettes and have a dog. I mean, that's bullshit. They're in the Delta Quadrant. They should encounter more aliens like this. But anyway, so I did like it for that aspect of it. It was just so different and so other, and they didn't know how to communicate with it, and they know that it was just trying to keep itself alive. It wasn't trying to attack B'Elanna. So the doctor says he's out of his depth because he's not that well versed in exobiology. He needs an exobiologist, and I love this. I love that they again touch on the fact that Voyager doesn't have all the aspects, because if it were in Next Generation of Deep Space Nine, they would just have Starfleet send an exobiologist. Hey, send an exobiologist specialist over. But they deal with the fact that they're disconnected from Starfleet and they can't do that, so he has to create a hologram. Now, I find it a bit contrived that he just so happens to choose a Cardassian. Like, I'm sure there are tons of exobiologist genius in the Federation, but whatever. If he didn't choose a Cardassian, we wouldn't have the moral dilemma of the episode, which actually is very powerful. About how they find out from Tabor, a Bajoran crew member, that this Cardassian exobiologist actually used to torture Bajorans for research, and so all the research, even if this hologram that they're using, it has no knowledge of it because it wasn't programmed into him, because the Federation didn't know about this. Still, the research that they're using, that he got, was gained from really horrible, torturous methods, and so they dealt with the morality of it. And I love how they didn't really come up with a crystal clear solution, because on one hand, the doctor does use his research to save B'Elanna's life, and she's of course pissed about this, and Tom's like, well, don't be pissed, you're fucking alive. But they do delete his program, and they delete the research. So if they were put in a similar situation, they wouldn't be able to use to save B'Elanna. B'Elanna would have died, yet they justify saving her life in this situation. So I love that ambiguity. I love that grayness of it. That's something that Star Trek usually doesn't do very often. So very much appreciate it. Now we'll move on to number 37, which is Persistence of Vision. Now this is an episode I actually refused to watch when it first came out, because the promos for it painted as it was all about that stupid Victorian holodeck program that Janeway used to go, and I fucking hated that. But it actually turns out that wasn't the main focus. of the episode. It kind of, at the start it was like one of the setting, but it wasn't all about the stupid holodeck program. It was actually about this alien who were inflicting visions. And I love the trippiness of this episode. I love how like the crew slowly starts to succumb to different like delusions. Tuvok thinks he's with his wife. Tom Paris thinks he's talking to his father, who's played by a different actor in this episode, but let's forget that. And and what I love most is that this is one of the episodes that uses Kess's psychic abilities or telekinetics or powers. I love that. I think they should have done that more. That's what I like. I think season 2 handled Kess the best. Season 3 destroyed her. I talked about that already. But because we see episodes like this where she's able to actually, and this shows like how powerful, this episode in particular shows how powerful her skills are, that she just hasn't learned, not skills but her abilities, that she hasn't learned to use yet. She hasn't acquired the skills to use them, but some of them come naturally to her, and she's able to sort of fight off this alien and inflict his sort of visions takes over back onto him. And that was intense. This is a very intense, very twisted, very creepy, very surreal episode. I love that. I love that sort of thing. Now, it's not higher on my list because the ending was kind of cheesy when after they caught him, they'd be like, well, you see, I'm not really here. And he disappears. I'm like, okay, take it back a notch. That is a step too far. And also the fact that his motivations are, well, because I can, which is, again, come up with better motivations than that. But other than that, I did really like this episode. Okay, so coming in at number 36 is Think Tank. I don't know, like, I always don't know what to feel about this episode, other than I like it. I like Jason Alexander's portrayal. He's really awesome. He shows off that he's a good actor. He can do, like, he's a diverse actor, because this character could not possibly be any more different than George from Seinfeld, except that's like the big sell. Hey, it's George from Seinfeld. He's playing a totally different character. And in fact, I think the way they had to convince him to do a guest appearance, because apparently he's a huge Star Trek fan. Like, he's hosted like Star Trek things before. And so, but I believe that he had it sort of in his contract or something that he didn't want to play a character that was like George from Seinfeld. And so they came up with this character who is like this evil genius. And he does such a good job. It's such and I also love this has like the space bounty hunters, which is something we don't see much, like a whole race. I wish we would have seen more of these guys, really. A whole race of bounty hunters that were hired to get Voyager. And of course they were hired by this, by the Jason Alexander. I can't remember his name, but the think tank that hired him to take down Voyager. And so that was an intense story. I love those bounty hunter guys. And I love the interactions with the think tank and how they had, like, again, we're getting not just someone with a forehead or an alien smoking a cigarette with a dog. We get weird aliens in the Delta Quadrant, like, we see an aquatic, like, creature. And, of course, they did this more in Enterprise. But, swimming in a tank. And then we have this weird, like, guy and floating thingy. And then artificial intelligence. So all these different diverse, and I love how they made a point of making these aliens so diverse. And of course this becomes what Janeway ends up using against them at the end of the episode. And I love the way that what Janeway have to do to overcome them, because she realizes that their whole thing is that they're super smart and they think through every scenario. So the only way to defeat him was to sort of dumb down their approach, which I love that. And it was great. I love seeing, this is, I think, one of the rare times we see Janeway be sneaky like this. But again, like, I do like this episode, but the other parts of it, I think, like, overall, I don't think it's great. I don't think it's one of the best. I don't think there's any one particular thing I hold against it. It's just when I look at it as a whole, like, it was good, but I just don't see it as, like, that great. Anyway, let's move on to my number 35, which is Alliances. Now, this is one of those episodes I was talking about that I see on people's worst lists. In fact, I think I see it on worst lists all the time. I always liked this episode. Actually, to be honest, when I was first watching season 2, I wasn't watching it every week, and I was sort of falling in and out of Voyager, and I was more into Deep Space Nine. Who can blame me? Deep Space Nine was in its 4th season at the time, and so I was kind of iffy on Voyager. But this is the episode that really got me back in it. Like, when I saw this episode, I was like, "This is really good." Now, a lot of people hold the ending against this episode. In fact, say that's why the episode sucks, is because of the ending. I will grant you, I disagree. I agree that the ending was bad and that the episode would have been much better off had they not gone with the ending. But I don't think it ruins the episode at all. I think the episode that came before is still really great. Now, what I'm talking about is, so the premise of the episode is, and again, this premise is kind of inconsistent, but we'll overlook that. The premise is Voyager's constantly getting their ass kicked by the Kazon, and they realize that they can't continue on with this or they'll be destroyed. So they need to make alliances with certain Kazon sects. And this is, I think, a good use of the Kazon, because the fact that Kazon are different from Klingons, or they're more like the Klingons how they're portrayed in Discovery, really, how there's different sects, they're not one unified empire. As we know them for most of. So so they play off the fact that there's different sections, different sects of the Kazon, and so Chakotay proposes making an alliance with one or two of them, which is fascinating. I think it would have been more fascinating had they actually followed through with this, and when they're in the negotiations with Maj Kula and Seska, where Kula lets his sort of egotistical and sexism get the better of him, which I loved. I just think it was such a great episode, seeing them sort of trying to negotiate with these Kazon. But then we meet the Trabe, who were mentioned in earlier episodes. So again, great continuity for Voyager, where the Trabe were seen as they owned the Kazon. They repressed them and had them enslaved, but the Kazon overthrew them and just went wild and took over the section of the galaxy. And so then Voyager says we'll make an alliance with the Trabe, but they want to use the Trabe to broker peace between them and the Kazon. But then, of course, the Traber turn out to be assholes and try to assassinate all the Klingon. Freudian slip there. All the Kazon leaders. And, that was great. That was fascinating. Now, the thing about the ending that people don't like, and I will agree with this, is that the conclusion they come to is, well, we don't need alliances. It's not worth it, which is dumb, because they don't actually resolve the dilemma that was asserted at the start of the episode. At the start of the episode, they say, we're constantly getting our asses kicked. We're going to get destroyed unless we do something. And by the end of the episode, they don't actively do anything about it. So if the premise wasn't bullshit, then Voyager would be destroyed later by this constant Kazon. Sorry, I did it again. Constant Kazon attacks, and yet never mentioned again. So I do see why that frustrates some people, but I think even so, it was great. It's fascinating too, hearing Tuvok be the one to convince Janeway to try to make an alliance, because he even draws parallels to like the Klingons and how people during his time or Kirk's time saw them as a bunch of thugs and outlaws, but they actually had to reach out. And I think he mentions Spock, reaches out and makes peace, and I love that, and I love how they Janeway was willing to make an alliance but not sacrifice Starfleet principles. And I think it would have been more fascinating had she actually made an alliance with them or some other aliens, even if it wasn't the Kazon. But of course the Trabe turned out to be dicks, so it wouldn't be them. So I don't know, but that's more, I see that as more of a fault of the show overall, because the entire show should have been like them making an alliance. And we see other episodes like Year of Hell and The Void, which you'll hear about a lot later, that do deal more with them making alliances with other aliens, but it does it like quickly and mostly off screen and just within the one episode, where it should have been a long-term story arc. But again, I don't fault this episode for that. This episode was just a victim of the overall producer's mindset of the show. I still think this is a really great episode. I think it was one of the best Kazon episodes. I'm sorry, but I actually loved it. Anyway, move on to number 34, which is Dreadnought. Now, this is another episode, again, thought much higher of on my rewatch, because this is, again, another great character story with B'Elanna in season 2 before they destroyed her character in later seasons. And this is very heartfelt and fascinating, I think. And again, I think the only reason it doesn't rank higher is because there's not much to it. It's just a suspenseful episode. I mean, there's to it in terms of character story, but overall I wouldn't say, this episode is amazing. But, like, when I go back and look, because at first I thought, well, this is kind of boring, stupid, because, alright, the whole premise of there being a really super smart Cardassian missile that somehow ended up in the Delta Quadrant. They just said the caretaker. Why would the caretaker bring a fucking missile? He specifically brought ships with crews so he could dissect and examine them. He wouldn't bring an artificial, but whatever. Again, we'll give it a pass on the premise and say that there's this super smart Cardassian missile in the Delta Quadrant that thinks it's in the Alpha Quadrant and is being really obtuse. Again, that's another hit against this episode, where when B'Elanna tells it that it's in the Delta Quadrant, it should be... If it's that smart, it should know it's in the fucking Delta Quadrant. But anyway, malfunction, that's convenient for the plot. It thinks it's still in the Alpha Quadrant. But the character story that B'Elanna goes through in this episode is amazing, because you find out that she actually modified this missile to destroy Cardassian targets while she was in the Maquis against Chakotay's orders, and that is great. And I love how Chakotay doesn't tell anyone this, but she ends up confessing this to, I can't remember who it was now, that's so dumb of me, but she confesses this to a friend, and so that's fascinating that we learn that. And so she feels so guilty because there's this alien planet in the Delta Quadrant has absolutely nothing to do with their conflict, that millions and billions of people could be killed because of her actions. And so the lengths she'll go through, even like to sacrifice her own life to prevent that from happening, the guilt she feels, that was very powerful. And even Janeway is willing to destroy Voyager rather than let this planet be destroyed, which I love. Like, she evacuates the crew so they'll all survive, and this is the first time we really see her suicidal tendency. But she's willing to end the relationship she builds with this prime minister of this world, who at first thinks that she's an invader, but comes to like have a big friendship with her. That was done really well, so I did really like this episode for that. Anyway, let's move on to my number 33, which is Scientific Method. I've always liked this episode. More recently, I have seen it on worst lists. Why? It's totally beyond me. I really don't get it. This is a super intense episode. I love the way this plays out with 7 of 9 and the Doctor. How, at first you just see people acting all weird, like Janeway's acting really stressed out, and Tom and B'Elanna are really horny. Again, I have to give the whole Tom and B'Elanna thing a pass because that pisses me off. But anyway, we see people acting funny, but then we find out, and then people start getting sick, like Chakotay and Neelix get really sick, and we find out that there's a bunch of cloaked, like, more advanced aliens using Voyager as a sort of a laboratory, and they're just experimenting on it to try to improve their improvement, and they see themselves as superior. So again, you can make analogies as this sort of commentary to animal testing and stuff like that, so which I love the commentary there. And also the fact, like, just the way the structure of the story plays out, where the Doctor realizes what they're doing, but of course they try to deactivate his program because they're cloaked and they can see what they're doing, and they knock out B'Elanna because she figured it out too. And I love the way he's able to hide in the holodeck and contact 709 subvertly and get her to see the aliens. And that was such an intense, I love it, super intense storyline where she can see these aliens fucking with people's heads and no one else knows that she sees that. So they think that she's acting weird, and Tuvok, because they're still suspicious of Seven because this is early and her, when she first joined the crew. And I love that dynamic. And then once they find out that these aliens, they still have the upper hand and they still refuse to leave. And this kind of reminds me of Nagilum a bit, but done way better, where he's just like, well, we're going to kill half of your crew, nothing you can do about it, so if you try to resist, we'll just kill you all. And I love Janeway's solution. Janeway's solution is to be like, fuck you, I'll rather destroy the ship. So she plunges Voyager into the weird pulsar thingy, and the other ships are going to be destroyed, and like, you're bluffing. She's like, I'm not. And then Tuvok is like, tells the crew, he's like, well, I wasn't exaggerating on our chances, we're going to die. Now, of course, they don't die because we wouldn't have a show, but I love the fact that she was willing to kill themselves to destroy the whole crew rather than to let these aliens get away with what they're doing, which I am completely 100% behind. You can say, well, if it's better to half the crew survive, even if they're deformed, than if everyone died. But no, you can't let it's more the principle that you cannot let these arrogant motherfuckers get away with doing this shit. And that you need to keep, even if it saves half your crew, you just cannot, because they'll continue doing this unharmed. And she was able to destroy their ships by doing this. And I loved it. I love that she just went crazy. So I always thought this was a super intense episode. I like it. Anyway. We'll move on to my number 32, which is Riddles, and I'll try to talk about this episode without mentioning that other episode I hate, because I compare them a lot, so I won't do that here. Riddles was I think it was a really good character episode. It was a really good interaction, because we get a lot of Neelix and Tuvok episodes, because Neelix goes around annoying Tuvok, and Tuvok goes around being a dick to Neelix for annoying him. And I love that we get that relationship flipped on its head, where Tuvok becomes more like the brain of a child or a mentally disabled person after he suffers like a near-death experience, and Neelix becomes his surrogate guardian, and how Tuvok latches on to Neelix. And it was really touching, really, seeing Tuvok being like, I listen to jazz because it swings and stuff like that. And I actually thought this was really effective, and especially towards the end of the episode, when Tuvok, of course, is really frustrated because he can't remember being the man he used to be, this tactical officer. And when Neelix tries to keep pushing him, oh, you can do it, he gets really pissed off until Neelix accepts him for who he is. It's like, this is who you are now, you're no longer that guy, you're now. And he becomes so much happier because of that, and to see Tuvok smiling and baking cakes. I mean, it was really well done character development, and I love by the end of the episode where they figure out how to fix Tuvok, and he doesn't want to do it. I'm not going to mention that in another episode. Anyway, he doesn't want to do it, but Neelix sort of talks him into it, and even though Neelix, if he was being selfish, he wouldn't, because he likes this Tuvok better, because this is his relationship. He gained this really strong bond with Tuvok, and as soon as Tuvok goes back to being his old self, that bond's going to be lost. And it was really interesting at the end of the episode how Tuvok's back to himself, and he's being a dick again. He's being, I don't want to bake cakes, I got better things to do with my time, fuck off, Neelix. But then he answers the riddle that's posed at the start of the episode, and Neelix says that's not really logical, and he's like, no, it's not. So saying there was a tinge of his time as being who he was that still survived, and there's still a closer bond. very, very well produced character story. Now, the B plot with like the cloaked aliens and that investigator trying to find the cloaked aliens was kind of throwaway, kind of forgettable, which maybe is why this isn't higher. But the character story was done really well. Got through it without talking about the other episode. Anyway, let's move on to my number 31, Unity. Yeah, I think this is an underappreciated episode because this was the first appearance of the Borg, and a lot of people were disappointed in this because they were expecting like a big best of both worlds action, extravaganza. Instead, we got this, which is more of a character-based plot, and so a lot of people were disappointed. But then they did Scorpion, which I'll get to much later, which was the action extravaganza that they were hoping for. Now, I love Scorpion, but when you compare it to some of the action extravaganzas they had in the later seasons, like Dark Frontier, which you can watch my worst list to hear me rant about that episode, you can actually appreciate Unity a lot more and say it was really underappreciated and underrated. How it's about Chakotay, falling into a nest of, former drones. And, at first he just thinks they're a weird amalgamation of all these aliens. And they said, oh, we were abducted by this alien race and brought here. But then you find out that the alien race was the Borg, and they were assimilated. And somehow they managed to be free. But they kept their connection via, the interconnectedness part of it, but not through the Borg. And that's what sort of brought about peace, and how they wanted to strengthen that interconnectedness to bring about peace, solve the situation, because they were in danger, it was being overrun by war and battles, and they were infighting, and they wanted to put an end to it. And so I love that, and I think that, and it was a great sort of character moment for Chakotay, because he actually fell in love with this woman a bit, and then she ended up using him in order for his own benefit, so he felt betrayed. But then what they actually did was they did end up saving the world. So you have to, I love the grayness of that you're not in the right, they're not in the wrong. It's sort of, she did what she needed to do to save lives, to save the world that was in danger of being destroyed. And whether or not this will come back to bite them in the ass, I don't think it will. That's just my guess, but there's always that doubt out there, and I love that about this episode. So anyway, let's move on to number 30, which is Waking Moments. Another episode again I see on some worst lists. What the fuck is it doing there? Why do people have this on worst lists? I love Waking Moments. I always liked this episode. Everyone I knew growing up loved this episode. I thought it was very effective. It's very trippy. The way it begins with I love the way that it begins with all these various dreams. And people sort of make flaws and pick on the one with Tuvok being, embarrassed because he's not dressed. But come on, just lighten up. I think that's fine. I love it. And I love the different sort of, dreams end up being nightmares, and that the concept of having the alien race that exists in the dream world, and they use it, and they eventually trick them to thinking they're still awake when really they're asleep. Trick them into thinking that the aliens are taking over Voyager, but really they're asleep. And they have no real power in the real world, but they force them to fall asleep in the dream world where they have all the power, and they share a sort of unconsciousness. And it was a super suspenseful and intense episode, especially Chakotay having to sort of try to fight this, and he keeps falling asleep. He realizes that he's asleep because he sees the moon, and this isn't necessarily the way whatever they call it, that kind of dreaming actually works. But again, who cares? It's a great episode. I love the way that it plays out. It's super intense. So always been one of my favorites. So that is my number 30. Okay, so let's move on now to my number 29, which is The Thaw. Now, The Thaw is an episode I was never that high on. I mean, I kind of didn't know what to think of it. I've seen so many people say, "Oh, this episode's great," some put it in their top 10s, and I was never really agreed with that until it wasn't this rewatch. It was actually like a year ago or so when someone requested this as a review. So I sat down and reviewed it, and once I analyzed it, then it actually did make me appreciate the episode a lot more. Like before, I always saw it more as again, it was kind of like the same thing with Jason Alexander. I find it hard to separate the actor, in this case Michael McKean, from the story. So to me, this always came off, he always seemed like a bit, who really stuck out there. So it came off to me as just an avenue to have this great guest star and have him do shenanigans. And so that sort of stuck out to me, and that sort of interfered with my view of the story. But when I went back and watched it and analyzed it, I could see that there was actually a great story behind this, and it wasn't just his antics and whatever. And also, seeing Michael McKean in Better Call Saul made me appreciate this actor a lot more and what he can do. So it was actually interesting seeing his take here. Because, alright, the thing that always held me back is, they said, oh, the whole planet, and the whole planet turns out to be 4 people. What? The survivors, they never even touch on that. It's supposed to be millions of people in this, or I think it was hundreds of thousands actually, but hundreds of thousands of people in this colony that died, and there's only 4 survivors. They never mentioned that, and they never mentioned the prospect of there being other survivors. But whatever. I mean, really, the stakes are only as high as they are for the characters, and for the characters, it became more about these 4 survivors. No, there's only 3 of them, because one was dead when they got there. I think it was 5 originally. So 3 survivors, and out of the 3, only 2 make it out alive. But anyway, so these 3, it wasn't about the 3 survivors. It was about Harry Kim being trapped in there, and so that's what it became when they, went to help. It doesn't matter if it's 300 or 3, they should help these people, so they went to help them, and Harry Kim got stuck in there. So the stakes were relatively high, and I don't know, I guess the concept of an alien race, again, we're in the Delta Quadrant, an alien race has a clown, I don't know, but anyway, get over that. Maybe he's not a clown, maybe he's a clown equivalent, but really it's a clown. And that big thing looks just something out of the Muppets, but boy, was that fucking terrifying. It does, people who are, afraid of clowns and have a fear of circus acts like that will find this episode terrifying. I personally didn't have it as much, but I still found it very effective. Now, what makes this episode good, and what changed my mind about the episode, is this, the tension, the way it creates suspense throughout is perfectly structured. It's perfectly built, and some of the jokes or the terrifying things did come off really well. And I also really loved the Doctor's role as he's used, and because season 1 and 2 didn't use the Doctor that much, season 7 overused him, but I won't get to that. But so it's great to see an earlier season episode where the Doctor actually shines and is used correctly. In this case, he's able to go into the environment and interact with the other people without being put in danger like any human or organic alien would be. And so I love that, and I love the Doctor's wit with the Michael McKean character too. It was great seeing these 2 actors play off each other, and how the Doctor is pretty much being a smart ass to him. That really increased the episode. But what really made it great was Janeway's gambit at the end of the episode, where she managed to trick the clown. And I know it might be a bit cheesy, but it's one of my favorite moments of the show, is when she, the clown, Janeway, the hologram, we find out it's actually a hologram of Janeway. It's not actually Janeway, and that's how she tricked him. And she was like, oh, the thing is, I'm not really here. And he's like, well, you could have fooled me. And she's like, well, I'm afraid I did. That was awesome. That was such a great, in Next Generation, Picard gets a lot of kick-ass Picard's the fucking man moments. Janeway doesn't get as many. I think I touched on one already earlier in the episode. This is another one, and so it's always more. I appreciate it more when we get this Janeway kicks fucking ass moments where she's just like, and then at the end of the episode when he's dying and he's like, "I'm afraid," and she says, "I know." Again, that's kind of cheesy, but I loved it. I think it worked for the episode. And the way the whole episode built suspense was really well constructed. So I do have to give this episode a lot of props for that. Anyway, move on to my number 28, which is Shattered, Season 7 episode. I talked about this episode a bit in my other videos I just did, but this is kind of along the lines of what the finale of Voyager should have been, because it plays homage to all the seasons came before in a really good way. In fact, it's a season 7 episode that focuses on Chakotay, which is something we don't really get. So it seems kind of like an earlier season episode just for that matter. But in this episode, the science in this episode is a bit sketchy, but again, whatever. The ship is shattered into different time frames, and you're walking around the ship in your different time frames, and usually you would disappear, but Chakotay is inoculated by the doctor at the start of the episode, so he's able to move through the different time frames, and he finds Janeway, who's in the time frame before they left the Delta Quadrant. How that part of it can exist in the Alpha Quadrant while the rest of the ship is in different parts of I don't know. But anyway, don't think too much. So he inoculates her, so she's able to move out throughout the ship with him, and I love how they brought Seska back. They know that Seska is the best villain that the show's ever had, and it was interesting. Like, even though people hate the Kazon, they actually brought the Kazon back for this one episode, and it really worked. Of course, they brought it back to the time where the Kazon took over Voyager, and it was fascinating seeing them move between these different time frames and interact with the other episodes. And of course, you see the interactions between a present-day Chakotay and a Janeway of 70 years ago, which is also fascinating. It's interesting seeing them. Now, Chakotay always talks about, well, I can't tell you because the temporal prime directive, but she doesn't remember any of this anyway. I mean, obviously, she goes back to her own time period, not knowing of any of these events, so that was kind of irrelevant, but whatever. It was still really fascinating. I love the interactions between the two of them, and Chakotay, of course, gives a speech, which I wish that Rick Berman and the writers of Endgame would have actually fucking listened to. I guess it shows the disconnect that different episodes are written by different people, and this episode was written by people who get Voyager, where Endgame was obviously not. But anyway, Chakotay gives a speech on why what Admiral Janeway did in the last episode Endgame was wrong, and why she shouldn't have done it, and why it goes against all the principles Starfleet and Voyager in particular stand for. But enough of Endgame. Like, I'm just sour because this should have been the finale, or the finale should have been more like this episode, because it was a great way to pay homage to the different seasons that came before, and it had more of a Voyager feel, more of everything coming together feel, and I like that. Anyway, let me move on to my number 27, which is Resolutions. Resolutions is the episode where Chakotay and Janeway get stranded. And it's a second season episode. They get stranded on the planet because they contracted disease that while they're on the planet they're fine, but as soon as they leave the planet they're fucked. So they can't come up with a cure, and they've been there for months or whatever, which I think is a bit silly that all this happened off screen, but whatever. Because the episode begins with them being stranded, basically. I mean, it's slightly before. And so Tuvok becomes captain, which is I love that. I think that's a pretty interesting dynamic to see Tuvok as the captain of Voyager. And so Harry Kim and the others come up with a plan to go to the Vidians to try to find a cure for Chakotay and Janeway, which Janeway specifically forbade them from doing. So Tuvok, of course, stays true to his nature and is like, no, don't do this. And how Harry Kim starts to be really emotional, which I think this is a great Harry Kim character moment. He doesn't typically get his chance to shine. He does in this episode, and Tuvok just smacks the fuck out of him. It's like, if you say one more thing, I am going to relieve you of duty permanently. And I was like, damn, that was pretty awesome. And again, it shows that Tuvok isn't an asshole, because he is eventually convinced. Well, it's by Kes, and that makes sense because he already has this sort of kinship with Kes, and she's able to relate to him more on friendly terms rather than just yelling shit like Harry Kim was doing, but that was sort of in his character. But she's able to take their friendship and sort of relate what the feel of the crew actually is, and how we do feel emotions, and how as the captain, he needs to take that into account. So he takes it upon himself to go to the Vidians, and we get callbacks to earlier episodes with the Doctor's love interest, so she is able to help them because she still loves him. I love that reconnection because that was such a great episode, which I'll get to shortly. Yeah, so that was great. But that's just the B storyline. The A storyline was Chakotay and Janeway on the planet having a relationship, because they're no longer captain and first officer. They're just two people living together in the woods while they have this like Starfleet shelter, which is pretty advanced, and Chakotay always gives Janeway shit about it, how she's not able to sort of embrace nature and the simplistic more, and he's more used to it, which again is perfect for their characters, and I love that sort of jibe, that relationship they have. But I totally completely bought, like, when I first heard about this episode, in fact I think I only half paid attention to it the first time I watched it, like, this is dumb, because the concept to me sounded really stupid. Like, you have the two main leads, the male and female leads of a show, having a romance, and that always, like, I don't know if it's this way because I don't really follow pop culture much in modern times, but in the 90s it was so common. Every fucking sitcom, I used to watch a lot of sitcoms and other shows, whenever there's a male and female lead, they have to have a will they won't they relationship, and then eventually they will. And so when I saw this, I'm like, oh god damn it, Voyager, don't fall into this crap. And you know what's ironic is apparently they did want it. The writers or producers, some of the producers wanted to do this, and it was Kate McGrew who constantly fought against this. She's like, no, we should not have a relationship between the captain and first officer. I've never read how she felt about this episode, but me personally, I think this episode does an amazing job of sidestepping that, of exploring their feelings for each other, but in the context that makes total sense, and it makes sense going forward, makes complete sense going forward after this episode, how they never express those feelings again. They do become closer. We do see that. And after this episode, we see them, they have like dinner with each other all the time, and they have like outside of work relations, but they always keep it platonic, because I think they have this just underlining understanding of that they are captain and first officer, and they can't let this get the better of them, but they're able to eventually, like in later seasons, get into a comfortable place. And like the episode I was just talking about, Shattered, we see this where they're having dinner and having that. We see the Chakotay and Janeway relationship. And then that, I'm getting back to Shattered, but in that episode, the past Janeway even asked the future Chakotay, how deep does our relationship go? And he says, well, let's just say there are some lines we never cross. And so I think it's a callback to this episode that they know that they have these underlying feelings, but they know because of their work relationship they can express them. And I love how the way this plays out, like, it's not very plot driven, it's character driven. I love it how when they're on the planet and we see the storm or the little monkey thingy, and again they're in the Delta Quadrant and there's a monkey, and they try to, it's some weird primate thingy. No, it's a fucking monkey. But anyway, yeah, the way, so that kind of, those little plot points were boring, but that wasn't the point. The point was the character journey, and I thought that played out really well as you saw Chakotay and Janeway slowly getting closer until it got to a breaking point where he was giving her a massage, and you could tell they were getting the feels for each other, and they didn't like it. they were uncomfortable, and I love the way that Janeway's like, all right, we have to talk about what just happened. And so Chakotay says his story. This is a really great moment in all Voyager. Now I'm sort of talking myself into like I should have had this episode higher. But anyway, where Chakotay tells the story about the Indian chieftain's tribe, like an ancient thing about this Indian chief who's a wild warrior who falls in love with or doesn't fall in love, but he follows a strong female leader, and he finds purpose in his life, and then it becomes very obvious by the end of that story that he just made that up, and he's just telling the story of himself and Janeway, and the way that she says, like, is there really an old agent tell? And he's like, no, but I thought I'd make it easy. And that was such a powerful moment. Now, it's made unclear whether or not they banged after that story. I kind of think that they did, but they kind of left that ambiguous. But the next time we see them, they're almost full relationship mode, but then Tuvok comes back and says, hey, guess what? We can cure your disease. You can come back to Voyager. And so the first thought wasn't like, oh, yay, Voyager again. The first thought was like, oh, fuck. We have to give up what we have now. And that end scene, to see them back on the bridge, Janeway and Chakotay sitting next to each other, and they're talking shop, they're being professional, I mean, I'll look into the diagnostics, blah, blah. It's like, you got it, Captain. Get to it first thing. That was such a powerful use of subtle, like the subtext of that scene was just so palatable, so strong. I do think I should have had this episode up higher, but all these the next episodes I get to are great too. But anyway, good episode. Let me get into number 26, which was Hunters. Now, this is an episode, again, with the rewatch, I appreciate this episode a lot more. Because whenever I thought of this episode before, I thought of the first introduction of the Herosian, which was kind of boring. It was kind of like the way that, Seven and Tuvok are captured by them, and they're like, oh, we're going to go, rah, rah, rah. And then the Herosian weren't really done that well in this first episode. They sort of perfected them a bit later on. But in this episode and the next one, they appear prey. They're way, way taller. Whereas in other episodes, like the Killing Game, they're seen kind of like the same height as humans, only slightly like tall humans. Whereas in this episode, they're like abnormally like taller than any human had the right to be. They're like 9 feet, 10 feet tall. But they I guess they got sick of doing the special effects for that. So I wasn't impressed with that plot. But when I went back and watched it, I realized that's just the B plot. The A plot was actually about the letters from the Alpha Quadrant, because and again, we actually get some fucking continuity in Voyager, because this episode takes place after, what the hell is it? The one when the Doctor goes back to the Alpha Quadrant, which may surprise you, is actually not on my list, because that's generally considered like top 5 best Voyager, and I don't hate it, I just don't think it's that great. I think it's overrated. But anyway, Message in a Bottle, yeah, that's the name of it. Anyway, you won't find that on my list, because I gave that a 7, so it just missed out on the 50. But yeah, I just don't think it was that great, but it was good. But anyway, the follow-up I actually think is better, because we get the letters from the Alpha Quadrant, and they have just, this is so great. This is great character moments. We actually connect with these on a human level of all the characters involved as they receive letters from home. And of course we get Harry, who's like, haven't to get a letter from my parents, and Tom does get a letter from his father, but he doesn't want to read it. And to see that juxtaposition, and the way also B'Elanna, she just got the worst news, and I love this, they actually keep continuity with Deep Space Nine, how the Maquis has been wiped out, and Chakotay and B'Elanna find out they've been wiped out. Now, the way Chakotay phrases it, he says a species from the Gamma Quadrant. When Voyager left, this was during the 3rd season of Deep Space Nine, they know who the Dominion was. They were aware of the Dominion, just say the Dominion. Don't even want to say, but anyway. And it's funny that they talked about the Maquis being wiped out, but no one mentions the fact that the Federation are in the middle of a war that they're losing. Nobody brings that point up, but again, whatever. But that was a great character moment with B'Elanna and Chakotay, and to have the B'Elanna actually the juxtaposition between her dealing with receiving the worst news of her life, at the same time, Tom's like whining about not wanting to talk to his father, and I love how she tries to be sympathetic at first, but eventually lets the weight of it just gets in. You're just whining about this, blah blah blah. Great character interactions, and of course, also, with 7 of 9, where she's trying to, she's the one getting all the letters, and she doesn't really understand why people are so affected by the letters. And of course, Janeway gets the Dear John letter, where her, her fiance was during the first episode. He's apparently moved on and married someone else, and so that's just a lot of great human moments in this episode. And I love how, the array that they're using to get this letter this is where the B plot comes in with the Hirogen, is that's destroyed because they have to destroy it in order to save Tuvok and 7 of 9. So that was really powerful ending to it all too. So anyway, let's move on to my number 25, which is The Gift. This was a very powerful follow-up to Scorpion. Some people consider it the third part. Not really. It's kind of like in the same way Family was the follow-up to Best of Both Worlds. The Gift was the follow-up to... some people consider Family the third part, Best of Both Worlds, but it's not. It's in the same. It's just a follow-up to it. And again, continuity. Thank you. Where we get the events of Scorpion, because at the end of the Scorpion, 7 of 9 is still fully Borg, and she's trapped on Voyager. So this is the first episode we actually get to see her. That Janeway gets the idea. We're going to make her part of the crew. We're going to help her become human. And it is very powerful. And I love how they really, even though it's inconsistent, I love how they take a different approach. Well, it's not necessarily inconsistent, but they take a different approach than seeing an Borg. With Borg, he's portrayed more as a naive young child who doesn't really know what's going on, whereas here, 7 of 9, separation from the Borg is portrayed more like a heroin addict going through withdrawals. I think the analogy there was very obvious, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I actually think that made it a bit more powerful in how she's just... It was more like an instinct, like she's working like with Harry Kim or whatever, and she just instinctively tried to signal the Borg, and she says like, I don't, and she even said like, I wish no will ill upon you or the crew. It was just like an overwhelming desire or need to go back to the Borg, and I totally bought the journey she goes through. And the Kes storyline in this episode was amazing, and it has me convinced that had they kept Kes around and not written her off the show, that they actually could have saved her character, because as I said, they destroyed her character in season 3, but she was written so well in this episode. I think they could have saved her character in season 4. And plus, I love that they even have a moment where she says goodbye to Neelix. Thank you for actually acknowledging that these two characters used to be together, and still should have, by the way. And so that was really touching, and of course her connection with Tuvok was really connected here, and the way she was able to save the crew. Now, her reappearance kind of ruined this. It didn't make my worst list in this, but it was close to it. It kind of ruined this. So you try to pretend that I can't remember, Fury, I think it's called in season 6. Pretend that episode doesn't exist, because this is the perfect send-off to Kes. Even though it was obvious, like the writers just wanted her off, or not the writers, the producers, because they couldn't have, since they introduced 7 of 9, they couldn't have too many cast members for, like, it was a money thing, which it's a shame. I wish they just would have kept her on. At least, maybe, like, reduce her to a recurring character, but maybe the actress wouldn't like that. I don't know. But I wish they would have kept her on, because I think seeing what they did with her character in this episode, I think they could have done better. Apparently, like, it's rumored that it was supposed to be Harry Kim that was written off, and that's why he got attacked by Species 8472 in Scorpion Part 1, because they were going to kill him. But then in Scorpion Part 2, he recovered because they decided to write Kes off instead of Harry Kim. And what is said is the reason why they changed this is because the actor Garrett Wang, was like rated in TV Guide as one of the sexiest men alive or something. I don't know how much truth there is to that. I mean, but it does sound, it really makes the producers come off as really fickle. Anyway, but I don't know. My choice would have been Cass over Harry Kim because they destroyed her character in season 3. But I wish they both stayed, to be honest. But yeah, and that moment like between Cass and Janeway, like some people have noticed, like that was probably genuine. Like the actors, those tears were genuine because Kate McGrew was really upset over the fact that they wrote her, Jennifer Lee, I think her name was, that they wrote Cass off the show, and really upset that she was leaving the show. And you know, there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that she was very bitchy to 709 and treated her very poorly. But you know, I'm not going to get into that. But anyway, that scene between them was so powerful, and it was probably because the actors felt it generally. It was so powerful where Cass said goodbye to Janeway, and the way the episode ends, like, it really brings a tear to my eye. Again, a nice, subtle, like, really poignant scene where Tuvok just doesn't say a word, lights a candle, like the same candle he used to teach the thing with Cass, and just stares out the window with the candle. That was such a great way to say goodbye to this character. I really wish they didn't write her off now. It was such a powerful scene. But anyway, let's move on to my number 24, Tinker Tenure Dr. Spy. And I said this was the second funniest episode in the entire Star Trek franchise, in my opinion. And I did a full-length review of this episode, and I talked about how the reason why this episode works so well, whereas like you get other episodes like Bride of Chaotica, which are funny, but the plot is horrible. Like as I said, there's so many plot holes in that, it pisses me off. And there's other certain episodes which are, you know, kind of funny, but it's just poorly written, and it's just like, oh, let's do a romp. And I'll be honest, generally speaking, you probably notice this if you just watch any of my Star Trek coverage from the entire franchise. Generally speaking, comedy episodes are my least favorite Star Trek episodes because typically they're not that funny and they're just goofy and I don't like them. And so many people are like, oh, it's fun. Why don't you like that episode where Loxana goes on Deep Space Nine and makes everyone make out with each other? It's fun. No, it's stupid. It's just not written well. But that's why I love this episode, Tinker Tenure Dr. Spy, so much. It's not only is it hilarious, and it is one of the funniest episodes out there, it has a good plot. It has a plot that makes sense. It has a good character story for the Doctor. And this makes it an exceptionally good episode. It's managed to do comedy very well and at the same time tell a powerful character story. I mean, bravo to the writers for that. This episode is hilarious. I talked so much, I'm not going to sing it this time, but that song they have with the Doctor singing the opera of Tuvok going through the Pung Forest, Tuvok, I understand. Okay, I am singing. But that was hilarious. It was one of the funniest things I've ever seen, and there was lots of other like moments of humor throughout the episode, which I won't get into specifics. You can watch my review if you want specifics, but so many great jokes, like the best jokes that any Star Trek episode has ever done. And on top of that, you get the hierarchy aliens, which were really interesting. They were played off. You could totally believe their plight, unlike in the episode Renaissance Man, which I didn't believe these characters. Renaissance Man didn't make my worst, but almost did. This one, totally like these aliens that were played off so well, and the story of the Doctor, like, it was played for comedy, but it was a good suspense story too. That it had a strong structure of the Doctor having to pretend to be the captain in order to prevent these aliens from attacking. Now, there was a bit stretch, of believability in that end, that they would actually just back away just because they were afraid of the Doctor, but that's easily forgivable as how great the rest of the episode is. So anyway, that is my number 24. Let me now get into number 23, which is State of Flux, the season 1 episode. This is one of the two episodes. The other one I'll get into shortly. that really, actually there's 3. There's a whole bunch, actually. What am I talking about? A whole bunch of episodes, but this is one of the 3 of the most poignant, as I say, of season 1 that really takes why I like season 1 so much, because I know a lot of people didn't like season 1, but season 1 is one of my favorite seasons of Voyager, my second favorite, as I said. Because there's a strong sense of community. There's a strong sense of the characters. There's a strong sense of a group of 100 or so people being stranded, stuck away from anything else they know. Whereas in later seasons, it could have just been any other normal Federation ship. Why didn't they just have it in the Alpha Quadrant? Where in the first season, you really get the sense that this is a community of people who need to learn to live together and have different character interactions. Now, the State of Flux, in particular, was great because it had a twist that this reoccurring character that we have seen since episode 2 or 3, depending if you call Caretaker 2 episodes. I'd say it's 1 episode, but anyway, since episode 2, Seska, who's reoccurring, that she's actually a Cardassian spy this whole time, and it actually makes sense. It fits into what we know of Cardassians, that they do go undercover as other species. We've seen them do this as Bajorans, and that they do this infiltrate the Maquis makes perfect sense. And I said I love how Seska doesn't necessarily wish the Voyager crew harm. In fact, when she gives this amazing speech at the end of the episode where she says, "I'm doing what's best for Voyager. You, Janeway, you are fucking us up." And of course she's pissed off at her for stranding them there in the first place. Again, makes sense from a Cardassian perspective. But she's saying, and this is something kind of touched on in Alliances, which I touched on earlier, about how she has the perspective they need to make alliances to survive. They can't let Starfleet Federation ideals get in the way. And you know what? Her speech actually makes a lot of sense from a certain perspective. I know there's some people actually completely agree with her, and I love that. And I love that the episode doesn't necessarily later she's played out as a straight villain, which I think kind of diminishes her character, but it kind of makes sense since the dynamics change after this episode. But for this episode, she's not a straight villain. She's actually, I think she's completely genuine in wanting to help Voyager. She just wants to do it the Cardassian way and not the Starfleet way. And you can kind of see how the Federation ideals, because a lot of people do disagree with Janeway's decision to strand Voyager and the Delta Quadrant. So it was so great getting that. And the whole mystery, the way they built up, is it Seska or Carrie? You didn't actually know, because Seska seemed like the obvious choice. So that made you think, well, it's probably going to be Carrie, because he's not the obvious choice. But I love how they actually did go with the obvious choice, and it did make total and perfect sense. Now, they manufactured a backstory between her and Chakotay in this episode that didn't exist before this episode, but that's forgivable because they use it very well here, as Chakotay has to look past his personal feelings to discover the truth that she is the infiltrator, even when she tried to make up an excuse to why the Doctor thinks she's a Cardassian when she's not, but really she is. Great mystery episode, great character story. Yeah, one of the stronger episodes of Voyager for me. Okay, so we get to my number 22, which is The Raven, the season 4 episode. I don't know, kind of this episode I like more of style over substance, if that makes sense. That's why I like it. I'm not saying it is style over substance, because there is substance to the episode, but I think the style is why this episode is so powerful for me. Because it's contributed, the style really nails down Seven's character journey. Now, this is early in her appearance in Voyager, so this is where she's still trying to integrate for Voyager. So unlike Dark Frontier, which is kind of forced, where she leaves Voyager to return to the Borg, which is kind of like, you really buy that the crew would buy, she wouldn't want to do that. But here, it's very early in her stage, so you totally buy that she'd want to do. I love how she's confused. She thinks it's the Borg that's calling her back, but it's not. It's actually her. She's remembering what it was like for to be assimilated when she was a child, and for her parents to see her parents being assimilated. And that's what I mean by style, because the flashbacks we get with the, oh my god, it's just so infinitely better than Dark Frontier. But anyway, the flashbacks we get with her parents, and this is always something that's stuck in my head, the way her father is screaming Annika as the Borg are taking them away, and the really great cinematography of, you see the Borg are played really creepily, because it's shown from like a child's perspective of like the Borg, of this really terrifying and traumatizing event that Seven doesn't see as traumatizing. Like, she even says, I don't know if it's this episode or another, she's like, I wasn't traumatized by the Borg, I was raised by them, but that's because it's repressed what this moment was like when she was a child, because she doesn't remember, because her life since the Borg has been all about the Borg, and she's pro-Borg, but because she repressed how terrifying this moment was, and to have her relive it and then go to the ship, which conveniently turns up right in Voyager's path, but let's brush over that as well, was so powerful. And that Tuvok was her guide, someone who's not really, doesn't feel emotions himself, but he'd understand her journey, and I think that was a really great choice to have him be the one rather than Janeway, who was on the ship with her, to sort of talk her through the trauma, and to have her, she almost reverts back to a childlike state and crawls up into the ball and is like, Papa, as she's reliving these events. And it was so well done, like the whole like visions, the cinematography, the way they played it out with the the Raven, you could like this flashback she has. That's why I said I love the style of this episode. It's so amazingly well done. Now, the plot is kind of iffy, but I think like the thing with the alien, the Bomar, who want to restrict them from going into their space, like that was kind of interesting, but it kind of didn't make sense how the Raven was actually already in their space, but whatever. And the plot with like Seven, like, fighting off the Voyager crew and able to get away so great is suspend disbelief, but still a great episode. Like, as I said, the style really overshadows any flaws this episode has. Speaking of great 7 of 9 character stories, and this actually kind of feeds off of this episode, number 21 is Survival Instinct. Season 6 episode, where 7-9 comes across a group of 3 individuals who, well, not really individuals. They're former Borg drones like herself, but they're trapped in this triage where they can hear each of the 3 others. Rather than the whole collective, they just hear each of these 3 parts, so they don't feel like individuals. They're trapped in 3 people. And they know 7 of 9, she had something to do with it. And so we get the flashbacks of 7 being stranded on this planet when they were Borgs, when they were all Borg, being in the ship with these people, and they crash, and they're the only 4 survivors. And then we learn the big twist, and this again gets to Seven's character, that they're starting to become individuals because they're getting separated from the collective, but the other 3 handle it differently, because they were all assimilated as adults, so they want to reclaim their adult lives. But 7 reverts, when she's reverting to her individuality, she's reverting back to her childlike state, which is being afraid, which is not wanting to be alone, which after living in a collective with so many voices, that's the last thing she wants, is to be alone. So that's why she forces, because these other 3, they want to leave and abandon the Borg, which again, she's so terrified of being alone, so she forces them into this triad where they all feel themselves perfectly. And that was so powerful. That was such a well done character story that really explores what it was like for 7 to be assimilated as a child. And you really tell this episode was written by Ronald D. Moore. That was a great writer. Actually came aboard just to write this one episode before he left the show, because Brennan Braga was a dick and hates continuity or any significant shakes up of the Voyager, which is what it needed in the 6th season. But regardless of that, this was such a good episode. And then they have the ending where Seven has to choose between letting these three people die or sending them back to the Borg. And she chooses to let them die because they have a month left to live. So she gives them a month of life left rather than... And I love that. I love that it's not a clear-cut happy ending, that the choice is more ambiguous. And of course, one of the people just so happens to be human. And I talked of my issues about this, how there shouldn't really be any humans that are Borgs in the Delta Quadrant. But regardless, she's the Starfleet officer, so she stays aboard Voyager. And of course, we don't actually see this. They don't no follow-up to this. We just assume that the next episode takes place more than a month later, so she's already dead. But whatever. But it's still a very powerful ending. Because it's not just like everything tied up in a happy little bow. It's a tough decision. And I think everyone agrees that, except for the Doctor, he was kind of against it at first. But most people agree that she made the right one. So anyway, let me get into my number 20. Top 20 now. Warhead. Again, I think I saw this on someone's worst list. I'm like, are you joking? I love Warhead. Always liked Warhead. I think, again, this is a great episode because of the acting. I love the character interactions. This is a great character story with Harry Kim. One of the few episodes where Harry Kim actually shines. And Garrett Wang, who's a great actor, is actually allowed to do his thing. And we get this storyline. And as I said, it's kind of, some people might say, oh, it's kind of similar to Dreadnought, because it's about like a missile trying to destroy some alien world that Voyager has to come save. Kind of, but totally different. Because in this case, it's an artificial intelligence weapon of mass destruction, which I love the concept. It's an interesting concept. What's even more interesting is, well, at first it doesn't realize it's artificial intelligence. I think it's an organic being, which I'm kind of iffy on that plot point, but whatever. They take it aboard Voyager, and the Doctor feels for him. He's like, he sticks up as an artificial intelligence himself. He sticks up for it. And this is something I think was done really well. Because in season 7, he does this a lot where he sticks up to other holograms, artificial intelligence, which I'm a bit more iffy on and I don't think work as well. This episode it works really well. But then the irony comes when the weapon, they try to disarm the weapon and the artificial intelligence component takes over the Doctor's hologram and basically holds B'Elanna and Harry hostage to force Voyager to allow it to continue its mission. I love this. You get some great interactions. Now, some people might think the acting is a bit hammy by Robert Picardo, but I think it's great. I absolutely like the way he starts screaming, "Everyone will be killed!" Like that, it was so intense. It really got my blood boiling. And I was just like, wow, this is like a super suspenseful episode. And just the way it was played out by having Robert Picardo be the voice of the weapon and just talk to Voyager, talk to Janeway, is one of the best sort of hostage. I mean, you could also say it's kind of similar to the Next Generation episode Power Play, but I didn't really care for that episode, to be honest. I think this is a much better use of that. And the acting, and the character interactions between Kim and Doctor, because, of course, Doctor didn't appreciate Kim being in command because he wanted to be in command, and he played on this a bit later, too. But it's interesting he learned to appreciate Kim more by the end of the episode and appreciate it. And Kim was really... Again, he really shined, had the principles of Starfleet and Federation come through as he was able to convince the weapon of mass destruction to destroy itself and the others rather than let them destroy this other planet that shouldn't have died. Very powerful story. Anyway, let's move on to my number 19, which is another season 5 episode, Counterpoint. This I thought was a very powerful love story with Janeway. They haven't done any, they don't do many love stories with Janeway. Whenever they do, actually, I think they do very well. There's another one I'll get to a bit later. But this one was very convincing. And, okay, so it's the aliens, they're in this alien space, who they're like authoritarian and they hate telepaths. And so Voyager is like hiding a bunch of telepaths, including Tuvok and Vorik. from in like this transporter beam and whatever, and so they're hiding from these aliens. But the lead guy, like the commander, can't even think of his name now, but this asshole guy, he comes to Voyager and he says he wants to defect, that he knows that they're hunting telepaths, but he's against the whole telepath hunting thing, and so he wants to help Voyager complete their goals. Now, you do find out towards the end that he's just lying. He's putting on an act because he wants to discover this wormhole to stop any more telepaths from escaping. So he's using Voyager to do that. And I love how you can look back in this episode and say Janeway was always aware, but they still, their love, like the relationship they had, the feelings they had for each other was still genuine. You totally bought it. You bought the way these characters connected, and it made the ending so much more powerful when you think, when it's revealed that this guy was playing Janeway all along. You think, oh fuck, this is an asshole, but you reveal she knew this. She had planned for it. She was hoping that he was genuine because she really did love and appreciate him, but she still didn't let that interfere. She didn't let that, and this is, I love this. Some people complain about episodes that show Janeway off as a badass or as like this really great Mary Sue or whatever, but this case, I absolutely love it. I think this is great use of Janeway, and it shows how she's able to, what a great captain that she is, that she's able to divorce her emotional attachment, even though it still exists. She still does love this guy. She's able to divorce that from her duties as captain, and she's able to see through his bullshit and put one over him. And at the end of the episode where, you know, she reveals the trick that she was actually hiding the telepath in a different place than he thought. He's like, oh, you created false sensor readings. And she's like, well, I did think that was the theme of the evening, isn't it? And she's such a badass, and she started playing the music, and I was like, that was such a satisfying ending. It was such an emotionally effective one as well. So, great episode with Counterpoint.